So this morning we are gathered to celebrate the lives of these two men, which I believe you can see pictures of now, Albert Porter and Allan Ward, civil rights brothers. So we have two speakers for you, both of whom knew these men very, very well. I would like to first introduce to you our first speaker, who is Kevin Jones. He has been a longtime friend of UCLR, and you've seen him about. I asked Kevin what I might share about him professionally before, and he said, no, it's not about that this morning. So I would like to introduce to you just Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Monica. Can you hear me okay with this? As she mentioned, I've been a friend of this Unitarian congregation a little over 20 years. And in that time, I've met exceptional people here. Some of us will remember Philip Smartlow, Janice Gates, Edith Bradbury, Martha, Mindy, Jan, Phil, Janice, Jerry, the list goes on and on. But especially my opportunity to spend time with Al Porter and Allan Ward. I'm not real adept at social media, but my nephew's husband is very good at it, and he helped me find Portia, and we were able to reconnect after, in my mind, she had moved to Nebraska. In any event, the remarkable hearts that Allan had and Al had resonate with anyone that spent time with them, that had a chance to be with them. I spent the last 2 evenings having dinner with my sister here, trying to figure out how we were going to organize, how do you explain two lives that were together close to 60 plus years in the span of 15 to 20 minutes. So the decision was that I'd share a couple of anecdotes that I'm aware of that had special meaning for me, and we'd really spend the majority of our time with Portia sharing, like, what was it like to actually live this life? Before I start that, though, I'd like to quickly acknowledge a lot of the people that helped put this on. The Worship Arts Committee, Debbie, Monica, Margot, Cater, Sky, and Teresa. They really are the people that organized this. So if we get a chance to talk to them later today, there's plenty of room to thank them for this opportunity. As opportunities go, we also have some people here that have a special resonance in the lives of these two men. I welcome Dan Reimer and the rest of the Baha'is that are here. I know Dan's a delegate, a national delegate, as is Portia, with the Baha'i Congress, if I'm saying that correctly. And I invite them after today's service, when we have the question and answer period, to share any reflections or anecdotes, thoughts they may have about their relationship with Al and how their Baha'i faith strengthened their friendship and their brotherhood. Additionally, we have representatives here from UALR, my friends Derek Boyce and, I'm supposed to know this. Thank you, yes. I'm sorry, Stephanie Purifoy. And they're here to share information people may have about the scholarship, the endowment program that's in Allan Ward's name. They'll have some handouts you might want to take with you if you choose to put some energy and or some funding into that program. It's a worthwhile thing. I know Al and Allan both truly valued education, and it's an opportunity for us to share that concern and channel it in a way that will help others. Knowing Al and Allan, in my mind, it raised questions. What is friendship? What is it to each of us? And more importantly, what's the foundation of family? What is brotherhood? There's not a term that encapsulates what these men were to each other. And once you hear more about the story of how they melted their families together, how that came about, how history played a key part in them bonding their families together, it's a story that truly resonates in my heart. And I think that once we have a chance to hear more about that, it'll resonate in yours. As I try to reflect back on the things that I shared with Al and Allan, one of the things that was special to both of them, and as I knew as they both got a little older, one of the things that Al Porter told me, he says, you know, of all the things we do, they were both on 17 different boards. And I'd list them for you, but I can't even remember them, I think. Portia, as we were talking the last couple of nights of how to put this together, we really had a plan, but really what happened, we ended up just laughing most of the night and remembering things that we had learned from those guys. Al Porter told me that the last thing he ever wanted to give up was Meals on Wheels. And through Al, he got me involved with my friend Mindy Morell. We did it for 12 years before the pandemic shut that down in terms of volunteers. But it meant a lot to Allan, it meant a lot to Al. And it was an honor to me to carry that on in their tradition. Being on 17 different boards after both of their wives became incapacitated, it was common for people to see Al and Allan together all over town. And I had more than one or two people say to me, oh, you know, they're gay. And I said, no, they're not gay, they're good-hearted. There was a time after Allan was hurt in a serious car wreck, I would pick him up, bring him to church, back and forth. And there were people in this congregation that speculated that Allan and I were gay. You know who you are. Turns out that wasn't the case, but it's interesting that in the culture and the times we live in, the default answer for the kind of closeness that Al and Allan had, it makes more sense that people are gay than a black man and a white man could be that close. And it speaks about where we are as a culture. It was an honor for me to spend time with them. And again, as I mentioned, Portia and I talked about how best to put this on. And initially, when this first came up back in January, Debbie said to me, well, Kevin, you could do 30 minutes, couldn't you? Well, yeah, I probably could. Well, the good news is we honed it down to where I'm only going to do roughly 10. And that'll give us more time for Portia to share not just her love and her relationship with her daddy and her uncle, Allan, but what that was like. What was normal in their family? A couple of things I want to share real quick is a couple of events that resonate with me. Allan got his PhD from Ohio State University, and in those days, the graduation system, they would put out a directory of who lived where. And Allan and both Al were both working at Philander Smith, and which, as most of us know, is a historically black college. Allan got a phone call from a guy, and he said, you know, I see you're in the directory, and I'd like to, you know, have you get lunch with you and have you introduce you to some of my friends. And Allan said, well, that'd be fine. Let's do that. Well, it was just an address. And so as the guy drives over, and I'm guessing there's been some debate about when this was, but it was in the 60s, he realizes where he is. And he drives up and he goes to find Allan in his office. When he finds him, he says, hey, you know, I didn't know where I was. And I'm sure you realize that and understand we can't really have lunch together. You know, it's not appropriate. I'd like to introduce you to my friends, but they wouldn't go for it. And Allan said, well, okay, I understand. And as the guy's leaving, he looks at Allan. I think he's on your right. And he says to Allan, you know, you can almost pass for white. Allan was bemused, and he, as I understand the story, he goes down the hall to talk to Al about it. And Al says, well, you know, this is like a teaching moment. Call the guy up and say, no, let's have lunch. Let's do that. And so Al did, and as I understand it, they did go to lunch, and the guy said, well, I appreciate this outreach, but you understand, don't talk about where you work. Don't let on to that. And I think Al Porter was right. It was a teaching moment. an opportunity for people to kind of expand their understanding of who's what and what are the assumptions we make. The last anecdote I want to share with you, most of us are familiar with the Freeway 630. When the Highway Department was building that from downtown Little Rock towards West Little Rock, they had hired Allan Ward as a communications consultant to put on seminars for the people that were being displaced. And Allan, being a professor in communications, apparently was pretty good at it. They really liked his work. And at the same time this was being done, the Highway Department was developing a residential section. Some of you may be familiar with it. No, it's known as University Park. And it's down University Avenue and 12th Street. Take a right, and there it is. When they were carving out the lots for people to pick out, as I understand the story, the Highway Department told the displaced white people a certain date where they could come down and pick out their lots. They told the black people another date after that. Well, Allan, being involved in the program, he told his black friends when the first date was. And the majority of people that showed up on the first date happened to be African Americans. As I understand it, and there's a question here that Portia and I were trying to figure out, somewhere around 40 to 50 different houses in that area. Allan was one of only 2 white families to move in there. And Allan was at work one day and they said, they were talking about University Park and how things were going. And one of them looked at Allan and said, so where do you live? He said, well, I live in University Park. As I understand it, the room got quiet. You could see people kind of thinking. And one of them looked at Allan and pointed at him and said, it was you. Allan said, yes, it was. He was then fired. But because the university had a special discounted rate to work with the program that was going on in Building 630, the Highway Department realized they couldn't get anybody at that price. And it was also a dilemma that he was doing a good job. They liked him. And it was that dilemma we've all been in on some level. I like you as a person, but the outfit, the group, the foundation you're with, I'm not real comfortable with that. In any event, they did rehire him. And there's many stories about the evolution of University Park. It became known in some circles as the Gilded Ghetto. It was predominantly black doctors, lawyers, professionals. Now, as time goes on, all neighborhoods evolve. But it speaks to the courage and the reality of what these 2 guys went through and how that resonates with us today. Allan built houses right next to each other. And I've asked Portia to kind of share some of this. They blended their families. Their children thought of each other as extended aunts and uncles. And each set of children were cousins. That is unique. There's not a term for that, but it is a special reality. And so I closed, and I was told specifically not to look at Portia because we would start laughing too much at some of the things we had a chance to share. In any event, I appreciate y'all taking the time to come. I know there's a lot of people here that have special memories of Al, special memories of Allan, and who they were together. So again, thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in the question and answer period with barbecue and our vegan fare after today's service. Thank you all.
Now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Portia Porter Lyle. She might be the daughter of Albert Porter, but she is also a force in her own right. Though Portia is now enjoying a well-deserved retirement, she has spent over 35 years as a policy analyst, spokesperson, management executive, and consultant in the field of aging policy and general public policy services. She's worked as an independent public policy consultant and for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration on Aging. Clearly, She is her father's daughter. Please welcome Portia Porter Lyle.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. So you guys, I've had this respiratory thing for about a month. It's not COVID, but I do have medicine and I have this water. So forgive me if I, cough up a lung. I hope that I won't do that. It is such a joy to be here. I'm really thrilled and very humbled to be here this morning. And so grateful to everyone who's worked so hard to create such a joyful event in celebration of my father and Uncle Allan. And so many thanks to our host today, the Unitarian Church, and for providing this opportunity, and especially because I've been in contact with these three folks, Debbie Goolsby and Monica, and Sue McDonald, and my very sweet friend, Kevin Jones, and so many others who work behind the scenes that I've been meeting this morning. This is such a special day for me. I'm gonna try not to get too emotional, but I'm not making any promises. But happy Father's Day. And it's also such a joy to see so many dear friends in the audience. I'm looking all around and I'm seeing so many friends I haven't seen in a long time. And I see Sue, I'm just saying Sue, hi. They can bear witness to a lot of what I'll be sharing today. So I'm so happy that you're all here. Now, we would be here for days and months and weeks if I could truly share with you everything about just how wonderful these two men were. So I'm going to do my best to give an overview of their wonderfulness and share just a few stories about them and what it was like growing up in this amazing family. Monica sent me a note and she said, "What's the title of your talk?" And I'm like, "What title? I don't know. But I thought about it, and one of the things about my family was that it was unlikely. It was an unlikely family. So if you'll keep that in mind, that'll be kind of the thread that I share this morning. And it's not going to be a linear narrative, you guys. I'll be jumping all around to share some things. But our unlikely family was my parents, my brother and sister, Uncle Allan and his wife, Aunt Helena, and their children, Allan II and Davina. That was our unlikely family. So, where do I start? Let's start here. Imagine, if you will, a young white man from the suburbs of Chicago in his mid-20s and a young black man from rural Mississippi in his mid-30s. In the early 1960s, meeting in Tennessee, becoming colleagues, then tentative friends, then best friends, then brothers of the heart. And these were the Jim Crow years. And these two young men dared the odds, and in a lot of cases, the laws of the land, to forge this brotherhood. Now, I don't believe in coincidence. So I like to think that it's more about divine providence that we're gathered here this weekend on Father's Day, on the eve of Juneteenth, and also in the wake of the 60th anniversary of the death of Medgar Evers. And if for those who are not familiar with Medgar Evers, he was the first NAACP field secretary for the state of Mississippi. And just a week ago, on June 12th, was the actual anniversary of that tragic event. And Kevin and I have been talking a lot about Medgar Evers and his relationship with both Daddy and Uncle Allan, because it was really the death of Medgar Evers that was the defining point in Daddy and Uncle Allan's friendship. And with your permission, I'd like to read a chapter. It's quite short, just two pages, from the book Uncle Allan wrote. I'll give a plug for his book, Civil Rights Brothers. that talks about that pivotal moment. And let me just say this quickly. The book shares so much about their friendship and gives a really wonderful overview of their relationship. So if you really do want a deeper dive, I invite you to read the book. There's some stories in there. When I first read it, I was like, I didn't even know that. So it's really wonderful. So let me just read this very quickly, this one chapter. Our local Jackson NAACP chapter met in a church sanctuary regularly to assess progress and formulate plans. We invited out-of-town guest speakers to offer us advice and encouragement. Medgar Evers came from his civil rights activities in Mississippi and met with our group. Albert presented a report on the local demonstrations, and I related the progress of the interracial discussion groups. Then Medgar Evers spoke. He offered analysis of the activities nationally and urged sustained efforts locally until all goals toward equality were achieved. After the meeting, Albert and I drove Medgar Evers back to Albert's home where he was staying overnight. The three of us went in and began to talk. He was going over episodes in his own efforts and projecting outcomes. We talked until after 2 a.m. He said calmly that he would probably be killed in Mississippi and that it probably could not be avoided. He said he would not leave the area to protect himself and that he would continue his activities. He added that there would be martyrs in the cause of civil rights, but that martyrdom should only encourage all of us to increase our activities, never to abandon them. Later that same year, we heard the news that Medgar Evers was murdered in his driveway. That night, Albert and I sat in the same room where we had talked with him and reviewed all that he had shared with us. Well after midnight, Albert said that he felt the big transition in racial attitudes would not take place in our adult generation, but in our children's, as they had increasing contact and as laws and customs changed. He said, being an only child himself, that he had always wanted a brother. I had a brother to whom I was close, but who had said that I was crazy to teach where I was, and that working for civil rights was stupid. I longed to have a brother with whom to share these things. So Albert said, tonight let's declare ourselves brothers, forming an extended family, with our children being cousins, and we and our wives being uncles and aunts to each other's children. In homage to Medgar Evers, we shook hands and created an inclusive family. And they really did. They took that oath so seriously that, as you heard from Kevin, they built homes right next to each other and raised their families in almost a communal spirit. An open door always, keys to each other's homes, lots of laughter and music, kids running around, having sleepovers every other week, and people of all backgrounds and nationalities and faith traditions and ethnicities coming in and out. And at the heart of it all was love. And that's what I hope comes shining through this morning, because we were simply a family, full stop. An unlikely family, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. And so we were just this unlikely family who loved each other fiercely. And it was very difficult for some to understand that, because how could these two families, one black, one white, truly love each other and sincerely believe that they could build a familial relationship together? I don't know what to tell you, but we did it. because love is a decision and an action. And when you decide to see each other as human beings and realize that superficial differences of skin color are just that, superficial, and come to know each other well and build a friendship that evolves into a brotherhood, this is the result. A family that was intentionally created 60 years ago and remains with the children and grandchildren of those men. And I really don't want to leave out my mom and Aunt Helena, Uncle Allan's wife, because they were both really exemplary women. Those of you who are here, a lot of you knew them both. And they had their own set of accomplishments and achievements. So can you imagine having two extraordinary fathers and two extraordinary mothers? So our family was together for everything and anything. Recitals and band concerts and athletic events and graduations and family reunions and weddings and births of the new generation of this unlikely family. There is not one single moment of my life where this family was not in the mix. Porter family reunion in Macomb, Mississippi. Uncle Allan and Aunt Helena and the kids were right in the middle of the reunion photo. And Allan II, he's called the second rather than junior. Allan II and I had several phone conversations and email exchanges over the last few weeks in preparation for today. And we've laughed ourselves silly thinking about so many things that happened when we were growing up. We also wept a bit about some of the challenges and the tragedies that our families faced together. But at the end of every phone call and every email exchange, we always said the same thing. We couldn't imagine any other way to grow up. And the ways in which our childhood shaped us, how we move through the world, how we navigate thorny situations, even how we parent our own children, is a direct result of our parents and our fathers in particular. Now, I also want you to imagine these two men and how different their personalities were, yet the fundamental elements of their character were actually quite similar. Uncle Allan was a bit shy and reserved, a true academic, a teacher in every sense of the word, a gifted author, a dynamic speaker, a riveting storyteller. He was curious about human behavior, how to communicate effectively, and how best to seek out moral truths. Uncle Allan was precise and spoke deliberately. My father, on the other hand, was vivacious and loud and spontaneous. He spoke quickly, especially when he felt passionate about a topic. He was intellectually curious about everything. He was a voracious reader, a music lover of all genres. He loved to dance. And he was a devout follower of his faith tradition, also mine, the Baha'i faith. It was actually Uncle Allan who first shared with my father the Baha'i teachings, which has as its fundamental principle the unity of all mankind. And I want to share here Allan II's words about Uncle Allan and his spiritual path, because he wanted everyone to know that the Unitarian Church was an important part of Uncle Allan's faith journey. And Allan II said, "My dad was raised in one religion and then joined another when he was a young adult. Then even later as an adult, he was in community with the Unitarian Church. I think it was important to him because he could be himself. And at that point in his life, he did not fit into typical religious categories and found a home with the Unitarians. He and I would joke that the Unitarian Church is where you could BYOB, bring your own beliefs." And one of the other many things Allan II wanted to make sure I immediately shared with you was simply what a good father Uncle Allan was. and these are Allan II's words. I really appreciate that my dad was a good dad. He cared about me as a person, letting me develop, even encouraging me to develop my own ideas and personality without passing judgment or forcing me to be or act in a certain way. He always cared about my education and happiness. He was a good listener and helped me navigate the challenges we all face as we grow up and figure out how to interact with others in this world. And I can echo those words about my own father. Daddy was such a nurturing parent, and we used to tease my mom when we got older because she was the tough one, and Daddy was the softie. And you know how Allan II mentioned how Uncle Allan was always so concerned about his happiness? And my father was the same way. In fact, from the time I went away to college, all through my adult years, until his passing, actually, he would start almost every phone call with, "Are you happy? You must be happy." And sometimes when I was younger, I would get really annoyed because I was not happy. But even in asking that question, he was teaching me to focus on what's important. And there's a quote from the Baha'i writings that says, "If you are not happy now, for what season do you wait?" And it was in that spirit that my father focused on our happiness. He wanted us to remember just how blessed we were in all ways, never taking anything for granted. And I was thinking about this as I was writing these notes, I think that might be why my favorite word is joy, and that I try my best to seek it wherever I can find it, and hopefully spread some joy to others, because if I stop and think about it, that's exactly what my daddy did in his life. He was truly a joyful being. And here again are Allan II's words about Uncle Allan. My dad never stopped learning and teaching. Instead of seeing one point in life where a person is fully baked or becomes the person they will always be, he saw life as a continuing process of development. He never stopped being curious, learning, and wanting to share what he learned with others. It was also clear that others really appreciated how he shared information. Anytime we went out to eat dinner, current or former UALR students would always come up and say hello to him and look at the rest of us and say how much they enjoyed being in his classes. I also believe that one of the many anchors of Daddy and Uncle Allan's friendship was that Uncle Allan was a teacher and Daddy loved to learn. But Daddy was also a teacher in his own way, and Uncle Allan learned from Daddy as well. They learned from each other because they had different experiences and insights and perspectives given how they grew up. But that in turn helped them gain a greater understanding about nuance and respecting the lived experiences of others rather than dismissing them out of hand. So, what was it that really allowed these two men to seek out each other, recognize each other's souls, want to work together, and gradually build this extraordinary friendship? In 1960, Uncle Allan moved to Jackson, Tennessee, where he had accepted a faculty position at Lane College. It's a small private black college. How in the world did this young white man find himself teaching at a black college? Uncle Allan had been very adamant that he wanted to do substantive civil rights work and he wanted to move to the South. He had gotten his PhD from Ohio University, not Ohio State, Kevin, Ohio University. But he was trying to figure out how to move to the South and teach and focus on being a civil rights activist. And some of his friends and colleagues repeatedly told him that he was nuts and that he would never be able to work at a white institution in the South if he was serious about civil rights activism. So they actually suggested that he explore positions at black colleges, and that's how he ended up at Lane. Now, I told you earlier, I don't believe in coincidence, but rather divine providence. Because as it happened, both my parents were also at Lane College. My mom was a math professor, and my father was the business manager. And that's where Daddy and Uncle Allan were destined to meet. And so the story goes that one evening at a faculty event, Uncle Allan asked one of the attendees who was leading the civil rights activities in town. And the person pointed to my father, who was on the other side of the room. And so Uncle Allan approached him and explained his intentions. And in typical Al Porter fashion, Daddy said, "Okay, let's do this right now." And so they began to work together as community organizers and activists, which was, and I really can't stress this enough, very dangerous at the time. They were together in meetings every evening and most weekends. They learned about each other's personalities and strengths, and they would drive together across the state and often to other states for all kinds of activities. And on these trips, they talked, and they talked some more, and learned that while their personalities were decidedly different, their core values and worldview were not. Now, I'll do a little time jump because there came a point where both men left Lane and moved here to Little Rock in 1966. And that full story is in the book, so that's a little teaser for you to go get the book if you want to know more. But after they moved here, they decided to really cement this notion of a family unit living side by side, and Kevin shared a little bit about this. So you have to remember that the neighborhood where they settled was a Black neighborhood, University Park, intersection of 12th and University. And that caused quite a bit of consternation on the part of many. For Uncle Allan, for a while, some of his colleagues and friends just couldn't fathom it at all. They couldn't wrap their brains around it. And they were actually very unkind. For my father, many of our Black friends and neighbors could not understand how in the world he was so close to this white man. Both men were viewed with suspicion. And lots of rumors swelled about for many years. People love to talk, especially when they don't really have any real information, right? So they make up their own narrative because they can't figure out what this is all about. I really can't begin to tell you about all the awful things that people said and assumptions that were made and spiteful things that were uttered. But one of the many lessons I learned from them both was to simply live your life with intention and integrity, offering kindness and understanding, but not paying too much attention to what other folks said. And there's this quote from Georgia O'Keeffe that I found that I just want to share, that she said, "I have already settled it for myself. So flattery and criticism go down the same drain. And I am quite free." And Daddy and Uncle Allan would say things very similar to that. You don't let anyone else define who you are. And when I went out into the world on my own, all of that advice was my anchor. One of the things Allan II said in one of our email chats was that he always felt very protected and loved growing up because he had two families looking out for him instead of just one, and I felt the same way. He also went on to say that he liked how our two families could talk about all kinds of issues and whatever was going on at any given time. And you guys, that's really true. I was thinking back about this. There was nothing we couldn't talk about. There was nothing that we couldn't raise with our parents, and we could go to each other's fathers and talk about anything. We were not raised with the notion that children should be seen and not heard. Our voices were always encouraged. And these are Allan II's words. "I will never know what it's like to be non-white in this country, but I felt like growing up with you and your family allowed me to better understand what it was like for your family. This in turn made me a better person. I think everyone in both of our families would agree that if people in this country just talk to each other more and in a civil way, the way our family could talk about issues and events and what they meant to us, we would make a lot of progress as a nation. How many people have access to people from other backgrounds on a daily basis, sharing real opinions in a safe space? That was our reality every day. One of the mysteries about Uncle Allan is how he was able to shape this worldview given how he grew up. His parents were not particularly progressive, and that would be an understatement. And in fact, they were pretty horrified by Uncle Allan's choices and friendships and relationships. When Uncle Allan's mother first learned that he would be teaching at a black college, she said it would have been better if he had never been born. Can you imagine how hurtful that must have felt? But that didn't dissuade him in the least. And one of the mysteries about my father was, given how he grew up in rural Mississippi, he was able to push beyond all the racial strife and bigotry he experienced, believing that it was possible to build a society where racial struggles could cease to exist and to ultimately find his true brother in the form of this white man. His embrace of the Baha'i teachings was also a product of all of this as well. But please make no mistake, my father was a very proud and strong black man, proud of his history, and he made certain that his children embraced that same strong sense of identity. And so it's interesting because their children were able to have a front row seat and observe how their friendship absolutely changed lives and hearts and minds, starting with Uncle Allan's parents. As I mentioned, they were not happy about Uncle Allan's choices and were very wary about this friendship with a black man. But each time they visited, their trepidation and fear decreased, because it was all about getting to know someone as a human being without the preconceived notions and stereotypes. And slowly, over time, Uncle Allan's parents came to genuinely love my father and all of us and realized that all those fears were unfounded. And the same was true for my side of the family. My relatives were very suspicious of Uncle Allan at first and didn't understand the friendship at all. But it got to the point where if they didn't see him or they weren't hearing about him, they would say, "Where's Allan? Is everything all right?" So the individual lives of these men and our overall family life were not without turmoil and angst and tragedy. There were death threats and personal and professional snubs and cruelty of all sorts. The two men even had their personal disagreements, some of which were more challenging and painful than others. But what emerged from all of the tests and trials was an even stronger brotherhood and family anchor, because no matter what, their decision to become brothers and stay a solid family unit never wavered. One of the most tragic moments for our family was the death of Uncle Allan and Aunt Helena's daughter, Davina, in 1996. Our family gathered together to grieve, and I remember my father weeping so hard after the actual funeral ceremony that I was worried he was going to become really ill. Davina was his precious, beloved niece, and he was her precious, beloved Uncle Albert. For Uncle Allan and Aunt Helena, I don't believe they ever fully recovered from that loss. Allan II shared this briefly about Davina's death and my father. When we learned of Davina's death, your dad made a point to check on me several times a day to make sure I was okay. I certainly have never forgotten it. Finally, friends, and I know I've probably gone over, Monica's so mad at me, I'm sorry. Finally, I'd like to share with you the events of 10 years ago, 2013. In January of 2013, My mom died after a long illness. 4 months later, in April of 2013, Daddy passed away. And in the fall of that same year, Aunt Helena died. I don't know how we made it through 2013, seriously. And Uncle Allan, for the first time in 5 decades, was without his brother, and the Gang of Four was no more. And in some ways, Uncle Allan was never the same again. When Daddy died, I flew in from the East Coast where I was living at the time, and I had to go to the funeral home very early the next morning, and Uncle Allan, of course, came with me. And when we went in to see Daddy, it was Uncle Allan who broke down first. And we hugged each other tight. And I wasn't sure if either one of us was going to be able to get through it. Uncle Allan lived for 8 more years until 2021. He died in March of that year. He ended up moving out to California to be with Allan II and his family, and he was quite frail and ill for those last years of his life. And when Allan II called to tell me that Uncle Allan had died, Allan II said, "Finally, the band is back together again." And we laughed a bit, thinking about all 4 of our parents together, talking and laughing in the next world, praying for all of their children and grandchildren, hoping that we will never let go of the legacy they left. And that's the pledge we've made as their children, to hopefully keep their light shining. Thank you so much for letting me share about my unlikely family today.
It is right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of lives well lived, those with the fire of commitment. It is right that we remember these 2 men today. And now I'd like to have Sky Brower come up to extinguish our chalice. And we will read our closing words together in unison. Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. Amen and blessed be. Please join us for lunch.